The notification sound on my phone made my stomach drop. Emma had just posted another Instagram story from Paris, and there she was, standing in front of a wrought-iron balcony with the Saker. See her gleaming white in the background. She looked radiant, her dark hair catching the golden hour light as she smiled that same smile I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. But what she didn't know was that I was getting the exact same view through the security camera I'd installed in that very apartment 2 years earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You see, Emma thought she'd found the perfect Parisian hideaway through some random rental app. She had no idea that the charming 2-bedroom flat on Rue des Martyrs, with its exposed wooden beams and vintage French tiles, belonged to me. She had no clue that every euro she transferred for rent was going directly into my business account. And she definitely didn't know that I'd been watching her build a new life in the city she'd always dreamed of visiting, all while thinking she'd finally escaped our relationship for good. 3 months earlier, Em and I were having breakfast in our shared apartment in San Francisco's Mission District when she dropped the bomb that would change everything. She set down her coffee mug with that deliberate precision she used when she was about to say something important, and I knew immediately that my world was about to shift. "Alex, I got the residency," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and guilt that made my chest tighten. The one in Paris. 6 months, full funding, studio space included. I should have been happy for her. This was the opportunity she'd been dreaming about since art school. It's a chance to immerse herself in the European art scene that had always fascinated her. But all I could think about was how she'd applied without telling me, how she'd been planning an exit strategy from our life together without a single conversation about what it meant for us. "That's incredible, Em," I managed to say, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while my mind raced. "When do you leave?" 6 weeks, she replied, and I could see the relief in her eyes that I wasn't making this difficult. "I know it's sudden, but opportunities like this don't come around often. You understand, right?" I nodded, even though I didn't understand it all. What I understood was that Emma had been pulling away from me for months. Late nights at her studio had become later. Conversations about our future had become vaguer. The way she looked at me had shifted from love to something closer to fond familiarity. Like I was a comfortable sweater she'd outgrown, but wasn't quite ready to donate. Over the next 6 weeks, I watched Emma prepare for her new life with an energy I hadn't seen in her for months. She researched neighborhoods, watched French language videos, and spent hours on rental websites looking for the perfect place to call home during her artistic awakening. She showed me listings with the enthusiasm of someone planning a solo adventure, and each excited comment felt like another small death of what we'd built together. What Emma didn't know was that I'd been preparing to, just in a very different way. 2 years earlier, when my property investment company had started expanding internationally, I'd purchased a portfolio of European real estate through various shell companies and property management firms. It was smart business, diversifying my investments while taking advantage of the post-pandemic market fluctuations. Among those properties was a stunning apartment in Montmartre that I'd bought sight unseen based on architectural photos and a virtual tour. The irony wasn't lost on me that I owned a piece of the very city Emma had always fantasized about. She used to talk about Paris the way other people talked about heaven. This mythical place where artists thrived and every corner held inspiration. I'd always planned to surprise her with a trip there for our anniversary, maybe even propose on that balcony overlooking the city she loved so much. But life had a different timeline in mind. When Emma finally found her apartment through a rental platform, sending me screenshots with messages like, "Alex, look at this place. It's perfect. The view, the location, everything." I felt my heart break and my business instincts sharpened simultaneously. She was renting my apartment. The universe had handed me the cruelest coincidence imaginable, or perhaps the most perfect opportunity to understand what she really wanted. The rental was being managed by a French property company I'd contracted, so there was no way for Emma to know the true owner. To her, I was just Alex, the tech-savvy boyfriend she was leaving behind in San Francisco. She had no idea that Alex was also the landlord who would be collecting her rent, monitoring her security deposit, and technically holding the keys to her new life. I could have told her. I could have revealed the connection and turned it into some romantic gesture about fate bringing us together even across an ocean. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd been looking at me lately, like I was an obligation rather than a choice. Maybe it was the fact that she'd made this huge life decision without including me in the conversation until it was finalized. Or maybe I just needed to know who Emma really was when she thought nobody was watching, so I said nothing. I helped her pack. I drove her to the airport. I kissed her goodbye and told her I'd miss her, which was true, even though I was already planning how to stay connected to her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The property management company sent me updates about the new tenant as part of their standard service: move-in photos, security deposit, confirmation, rental agreement signatures. Seeing Emma's familiar handwriting on official documents for my property felt surreal. Like living inside a dream where nothing quite made sense, but everything was strangely significant. I'd installed security cameras in all my rental properties for insurance purposes, but I'd never actually used them to monitor tenants before. Privacy laws and basic human decency had always kept me from crossing that line. But with Emma, every notification from the security system felt like a lifeline to understanding what I was losing and why. The first week, I watched her explore the apartment with the wonder of someone discovering treasure. She set up her easel by the window, arranged her art supplies on the antique desk I'd specifically chosen for that space, and spent hours on the balcony with her sketchbook. She looked happy in a way that made my chest ache, because I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen that expression when she was with me. By the second week, she'd established routines. Morning coffee on the balcony, afternoon walks through Montmartre, evening FaceTime calls with me where she'd show me around her apartment, unknowingly giving me tours of my own property. She'd gush about the perfect light for painting, the charming details like the original crown molding and vintage bathroom fixtures, the way the space made her feel inspired and alive. "I feel like myself again," she told me during one of those calls, and the words hit me like a physical blow. If she felt like herself in Paris, what did that make me? What did that make our life together? It was during the third week that David appeared in her posts. At first, he was just background noise, another American expat she'd met at a cafe. Then he became a frequent coffee companion, someone to explore museums with, a familiar face in her Instagram stories. Emma mentioned him casually during our calls, the way you might mention a helpful neighbor or a friendly store clerk. Oh my goodness. See, more than she was telling me. Through the security feeds, I watched David help her carry groceries up the stairs to my apartment. I saw him stay for dinner, lingering on my balcony as the sun set over the city I'd never visited but somehow owned a piece of. I watched Emma laugh with him the way she used to laugh with me, and I realized that my worst fears were materializing in real time, broadcast to me through my own surveillance system. The strangest part was how normal it all seemed through the cameras. Emma wasn't doing anything wrong, technically. She was single now, even if we hadn't officially broken up. She was exploring a new city, meeting new people, discovering new parts of herself. It was exactly what someone should do during a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity abroad. But knowing all of this, while she thought I was oblivious, created a strange kind of torture. Every phone call became a performance where I had to pretend ignorance about details I'd already witnessed. Every "how was your day?" required me to act surprised by stories I'd already seen unfold. Emma had always been honest with me, sometimes brutally so. The fact that she was now editing her experiences, leaving out David's increasing presence in her daily life, told me everything I needed to know about where our relationship stood. She was protecting my feelings while building something new, and somehow that kindness hurt worse than outright betrayal would have. As I sat in our empty San Francisco apartment, surrounded by the spaces Emma had vacated, I realized I was living in two realities simultaneously. In one, I was Alex, the abandoned boyfriend, missing his girlfriend and hoping their relationship could survive the distance. In the other, I was Alex, the landlord, with more access to Emma's new life than any ex should have. The question that kept me awake at night wasn't whether Emma was falling for someone else. I could see that happening in real time. The question was what I was going to do with the information, and whether I was brave enough to face the truth. That sometimes love isn't enough to hold someone who's determined to fly away. 4 weeks into Emma's Paris adventure, found myself checking the security feeds more obsessively than I'd ever monitored any of my other properties. What started as occasional glimpses into her new life had become an unhealthy routine that dominated my days. I'd wake up, make coffee, and immediately pull up the app on my phone to see if Emma was having her morning ritual on the balcony. I'd check during lunch breaks at my office, watching her paint by the window with an intensity that made my chest tight. Evenings were the worst. When I'd see David's silhouette moving through rooms I'd chosen the furniture for, sitting at the dining table I'd picked out online without ever seeing in person. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I watched Emma cook dinner for David using the vintage Le Croisette pots I'd bought specifically for that kitchen. She was wearing the yellow sundress I'd given her for her birthday last year. The one she claimed made her feel confident and beautiful. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Seeing her wear it for another man while standing in my apartment felt like watching someone vandalize something sacred. But what shattered me wasn't the intimacy I was witnessing. It was Emma's laughter echoing through the security system's audio feed. She was telling David about her latest painting, gesturing excitedly as she described the way morning light hit the saker. "See, you're from her window. Our window, my window." She spoke about Paris like it had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years, and I realized with devastating clarity that the something that had been dormant was her happiness. During our nightly FaceTime call that evening, Emma seemed more distant than usual. She propped her phone against the kitchen counter while she cleaned up, giving me fragmented views of the apartment I knew better than she did. When I asked about her day, she gave me the abbreviated version I'd learned to expect, carefully editing out any mention of David despite the fact that I'd watched him spend the entire afternoon there. "How's the painting coming along?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral while internally screaming about the lie of omission unfolding in real time. "Really well," she said, her back turned to the camera as she dried dishes. "I think being here is exactly what I needed for my art. The inspiration is just different, you know? Everything feels more alive." The casual way she dismissed our shared life in San Francisco as uninspiring felt like a physical blow. I'd supported her art for 3 years, converted half of our bedroom into a studio space, celebrated every small victory, and encouraged her through every creative block. But apparently, all of that paled in comparison to a few weeks in a city that happened to coincide with meeting someone new. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't continue living in this strange purgatory of knowledge and helplessness. Emma had made her choice to explore life without me, but she'd unknowingly given me a front row seat to watch it happen. The power dynamic was more complex than she realized, and it was time I stopped being a passive observer of my own heartbreak. I opened my laptop and began researching everything I could about tenant rights in France, property management protocols, and the legal implications of revealing ownership after a lease had been signed. What I discovered was that while there was nothing illegal about my situation, the ethical implications were murky at best. Emma had entered into a rental agreement in good faith, and I had honored that agreement by providing her with a beautiful, well-maintained property. The fact that I had personal motivations for maintaining that agreement wasn't technically relevant to the business transaction. But I also discovered something else. The lease Emma had signed included a clause about the possibility of the property owner visiting for inspection purposes with appropriate notice. It was standard language that most tenants never paid attention to, buried in paragraph 12 of a lengthy document. Emma had signed it without question, probably assuming she'd never meet her mysterious landlord who lived thousands of miles away. Over the next few days, I found myself strategizing like I was planning a business acquisition rather than confronting my relationship's demise. I researched flights to Paris, hotels in the area, even practiced conversations in my head about what I would say when I finally revealed the truth. The more I planned, the more I realized this wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about reclaiming some sense of agency in a situation where I'd felt completely powerless. My business partner Marcus noticed the change in my behavior during our Friday morning meeting. I'd been distracted, checking my phone constantly and giving half-hearted responses to important decisions about our latest property acquisitions. "Alex, what's going on?" he finally asked, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention. "You've been somewhere else entirely for weeks?" I considered lying, crafting some story about stress or workload concerns. What? But Marcus and I had built our company together from nothing, and he'd been there through every personal crisis I'd faced over the past 5 years. If anyone would understand the complexity of my situation, it would be him. "Emma's living in one of our Paris properties," I said finally, the words feeling strange as they left my mouth. "She has no idea I own it." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, processing the implications. "The Montmartre apartment. The one we bought through the French management company. That's the one. She found it through a rental app, signed a lease, moved in last month. She thinks it's some incredible coincidence that she found the perfect place. And you haven't told her?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with judgment I wasn't sure I was ready to face. She left Marcus. Made this huge life decision without including me, applied for programs I didn't even know existed. She's been planning her exit strategy for months, maybe longer. So this is revenge? "No," I said quickly, then paused to consider whether that was entirely true. "I don't know what it is. I just need to understand what I'm losing and why. She's different there, happier. And there's someone else." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the analytical expression he usually reserved for evaluating investment opportunities. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to Paris." The decision crystallized as I spoke it aloud. I was going to use the property inspection clause to visit my own apartment while Emma was living there. I was going to see firsthand what had captured her heart so completely. Meet the man who had apparently replaced me without even knowing there was competition, and finally have an honest conversation about what our relationship had become. When? Next week. I'll file the proper notice with the property management company, book a flight, and show up as the landlord she'd never expected to meet. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, and I could see him working through the potential consequences of my plan. Finally, he spoke carefully. "You realize this could backfire in spectacular ways? Emma feels like you've been spying on her, violating her privacy." "She's living in my apartment," I interrupted. "I have security cameras that she was informed about in the lease agreement. I haven't done anything illegal or even technically unethical. I've been a model landlord who's kept appropriate distance while ensuring the property is well maintained." "But you haven't been a model boyfriend." Accusation stung because it was true. A model boyfriend would have supported Emma's dreams unconditionally. A model boyfriend would have found a way to make the distance work, maybe even planned visits to Paris to share in her adventure. A model boyfriend certainly wouldn't have spent weeks secretly monitoring her daily activities through security cameras. But I also wasn't ready to accept full responsibility for the deterioration of our relationship. Emma had made choices too, and some of them had been cruel in their casual dismissal of what we'd built together. She'd replaced me with startling efficiency, finding someone new to fill the space I'd occupied in her life while maintaining the pretense that we were still together. The rest of that day I moved through my routine with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I booked a flight to Paris, found a hotel near Emma's neighborhood, and drafted the formal notice that would be sent to my own tenant informing her of an upcoming property inspection. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, but I was past caring about the absurdity of it all. That evening, I had dinner with my friend Lisa, who'd been Emma's closest female friend during our relationship. Lisa had always been perceptive about relationship dynamics, and I found myself craving an outside perspective on the mess I'd created. "She's been posting a lot from Paris," Lisa said carefully. After I'd given her a heavily edited version of my current situation, "She seems happy?" "That's what worries me." "Alex, can I ask you something honestly?" I nodded, steeling myself for whatever insight Lisa was about to share. "When was the last time you saw Emma truly excited about something? In your relationship? Not content, not comfortable, but genuinely excited?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected because I couldn't immediately answer it. Emma had been excited about the Paris opportunity, about her art, about the possibility of experiencing something completely new. But when had she last been excited about us? "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe that's your answer right there?" Maybe this isn't about Paris or some other guy? Maybe Emma needed to remember what it felt like to choose something for herself, to feel excited about her life. Again, Lisa's words followed me home that night, echoing in my head as I sat in the apartment Emma and I had shared. Her absence was everywhere in the empty easel by the window, in the gap where her books used to line the shelf, in the way the space felt too large and too quiet for one person. But I was committed to my plan now. In less than a week, I would be in Paris, standing in my own apartment while my ex-girlfriend tried to explain why she'd built a new life in the space I'd unknowingly provided for her. The conversation would either give us closure or destroy whatever remained of what we'd once meant to each other. Either way, I was finally ready to stop being a spectator in my own story. The flight to Paris felt like the longest 9 hours of my life, every minute stretching as I rehearsed conversations that would probably bear no resemblance to reality. I'd sent the required 48-hour notice through the property management company, a formal document that informed Ms. Rodriguez that the property owner would be conducting a routine inspection and maintenance check on Tuesday afternoon. Emma had responded through the management company with polite acknowledgement, probably assuming she'd be meeting some middle-aged French businessman who barely spoke English. I landed at Charles de Gaulle on a crisp Tuesday morning in late spring, the kind of day that made Paris look like every romantic movie ever filmed there. Taking the Rue train into the city, I watched the suburbs give way to the iconic Haussmannian architecture that Emma had been photographing obsessively for the past month. Everything looked exactly like her Instagram posts, but experiencing it firsthand felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's dream. I'd booked a hotel room 6 blocks away from the apartment, close enough to walk, but far enough to avoid any accidental encounters before I was ready. The plan was simple: arrive at the apartment at the scheduled time, conduct an actual property inspection to maintain legitimacy, and then have the conversation that would either repair or definitively end my relationship with Emma. Simple in theory, catastrophically complex in execution. My first stop was a cafe around the corner from the apartment, a small place called Le Consulate that I'd seen in several of Emma's photos. I ordered coffee and a croissant, partially to calm my nerves and partially to observe the neighborhood Emma had fallen in love with. Montmartre had a village-like quality that felt entirely separate from the bustling Paris I'd imagined. With narrow cobblestone streets and ivy-covered buildings that looked like they belonged in a different century, it was there sitting at a tiny metal table while practicing my opening lines in French that I first saw David in person. He was walking down Rue des Martyrs with grocery bags, moving with the casual familiarity of someone who'd memorized every crack in the sidewalk. He was taller than he'd appeared in Emma's photos, with the kind of effortless style that suggested he'd been living in Paris long enough to absorb the local aesthetic. What struck me most was how relaxed he looked, like someone who'd found exactly where he belonged in the world. I followed him at a distance, my stomach churning as he turned onto the street where my apartment was located. He climbed the stairs to the building's entrance, using a key that Emma must have given him, and disappeared inside. The casual way he'd let himself in suggested a level of intimacy that made my chest tight. Emma was sharing her space with him. Sharing my space with him in ways that felt more significant than anything I'd observed through security cameras. I spent the next hour walking through the neighborhood, trying to understand what had captivated Emma so completely about this place. Every corner held something worth photographing. From the street art that covered building walls to the small boutiques selling vintage clothing and handmade jewelry, the area had an artistic energy that was palpable, the kind of creative atmosphere that would naturally appeal to someone like Emma, who'd always felt constrained by the corporate environment of San Francisco. At exactly 2 o'clock, I stood outside the building that contained my apartment, holding the key I'd never used and feeling like I was about to commit some elaborate form of breaking and entering. The building was a classic Parisian structure, with wrought-iron balconies and cream-colored stone that had aged beautifully over the decades. I could see why Emma had fallen in love with it immediately. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my heart pounding with each step. The hallway smelled like fresh bread and lavender cleaning products, exactly the kind of authentic Parisian detail that would have charmed Emma completely. Standing outside the door to apartment 3B, I took a deep breath and knocked. Emma answered. the door wearing paint-stained jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in the messy bun she always wore when she was working. For a moment, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, and I felt the full weight of what I was about to potentially destroy. Bonjour, I said in carefully practiced French. Je suis le propriétaire. Emma's face went through a series of expressions that I watched in slow motion. Confusion, recognition, shock, and then something that might have been panic or anger. Or both. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity before finally speaking. Alex, what the hell are you doing here? I'm here for the property inspection, I said, switching to English and holding up the official notice. You received the documentation through the management company? You're the landlord? Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I could see her mind racing to process the implications of what this meant. I own the apartment? Yes. May I come in? Shh. Emma stepped aside wordlessly, and I walked into the space I'd purchased sight unseen 2 years earlier. It was even more beautiful in person than the photos had suggested. With afternoon light streaming through the tall windows and casting geometric shadows on the hardwood floors, Emma had arranged her art supplies throughout the space in a way that made it feel lived in and creative. Exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd bought it as an investment property. How long have you known? Emma asked, closing the door and leaning against it like she was preparing to barricade herself inside. I've known since the day you signed the lease. When you sent me those excited texts about finding the perfect place, you were describing my apartment. Emma sank onto the vintage sofa I'd selected from an online catalog, her face pale. Have you been watching me? The question I'd been dreading hung in the air between us. I could lie, claim that I'd only recently discovered the connection and decided to visit on impulse. But we'd moved past the point where small lies would serve any purpose. There are security cameras, I said carefully. Standard for all my rental properties. I've been aware of your daily routine. Jesus Christ, Alex. Emma buried her face in her hands. This is insane. You've been spying on me for weeks. You left me, I said, sitting on the chair across from her. You made this huge life decision without including me, moved to another continent, and started building a new life with someone else. The cameras didn't tell me anything your Instagram posts weren't already broadcasting to the world. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Emma looked up at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. Social media is curated. It's what I choose to share. This is different. This is violating. I wanted to argue with her, to explain that I'd never intended for things to unfold this way, that the situation had evolved beyond anything I could have planned. But sitting in that beautiful apartment, seeing the life she'd built in the space I'd provided, I realized that my intentions were irrelevant. The impact was what mattered, and the impact was that Emma felt violated and betrayed by someone she'd trusted completely. Where's David? I asked, deflecting from the conversation I wasn't ready to have. How do you know about David? Emma, I've been watching you live in my apartment for a month. David's been here almost every day for the past 2 weeks. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the courtyard. He went to get groceries. He'll be back soon. Are you in love with him? The question came out more vulnerably than I'd intended, stripping away any pretense that this was still about property management or business interests. This was about the fact that I'd traveled 5,000 miles to confront the end of the most important relationship I'd ever had, and I still wasn't sure which outcome I was hoping for. Emma was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the view that had become the backdrop for her new life. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and honest in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. I don't know, she said. Maybe he makes me feel like myself again, like the person I was before I got so comfortable and complacent. Being here, meeting him, it's reminded me what it feels like to choose something because it excites me, not because it's safe or expected. And I was safe and expected. Emma turned away from the window to look at me directly. You were wonderful, Alex. You supported my art. You made me feel loved and secure. But somewhere along the way, we stopped growing together. We became roommates who cared about each other instead of partners who inspired each other. So you decided to leave without talking to me about it? Remember the conversation about taking a break? about spending some time apart to figure out what we both wanted? You changed the subject and started talking about vacation plans. I did remember that conversation, and Emma was right. I'd deflected because I'd been terrified of what figuring out what we wanted might reveal. I'd chosen to ignore the warning signs rather than confront them, and now I was dealing with the consequences of that avoidance. The sound of keys in the door interrupted our conversation, and both Emma and I turned toward the entrance as David walked in carrying grocery bags and speaking rapidly in French on his phone. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, his eyes moving between Emma's tear-streaked face and my presence in what he clearly considered to be their shared space. "Emma," David said, ending his phone call. "Est ceq tu, va bien?" "This is Alex," Emma said in English. "My ex-boyfriend. And apparently our landlord." David's expression shifted from concern to confusion to something that might have been amusement. He set down the grocery bags and extended his hand to me with a smile that was genuinely warm despite the absurdity of the situation. "Well," he said in lightly accented English, "this is certainly not how I expected my Tuesday afternoon to unfold." The three of us stood in awkward silence for several moments, the weight of the situation settling around us like dust after an explosion. David seemed to be the only one capable of normal social functioning, unpacking groceries as if strange men didn't regularly appear in his girlfriend's apartment, claiming to be the secret landlord. "I should leave," David said finally, reading. The tension between Emma and me, with the perceptiveness of someone who'd clearly spent time understanding her moods. "This seems like a conversation you two need to have privately," Emma said quickly, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, maybe that's not a bad idea. Alex and I have some things to discuss." David nodded, kissing Emma's forehead in a gesture so casual and intimate that I felt like an intruder witnessing something private. "I'll be at Le Consulate if you need me," he told her. "Take all the time you need." After David left, the apartment felt simultaneously too large and too small for the conversation Emma and I needed to have. She busied herself making tea, a nervous habit I recognized from our years together, while I examined the paintings she'd been working on during her time in Paris. Her art had evolved dramatically in just a month. The careful, controlled compositions she'd been creating in San Francisco had given way to bold, expressive pieces that seemed to capture movement and emotion in ways her previous work never had. There was a vitality to these new paintings that spoke to exactly what she'd been trying to tell me about feeling inspired and alive. "Your work is incredible," I said, genuinely meaning it, despite everything else happening between us. "Paris has been good for your art." "Thank you," Emma replied, handing me a cup of tea and settling back onto the sofa. "It feels like I've remembered how to see again. Everything here is so different from home, so full of history and beauty, that I can't help but want to capture it." "Is that why you didn't tell me about David? So you knew I'd try to stop you from having this experience?" Emma sipped her tea thoughtfully before answering. "I didn't tell you about David because I wasn't sure what it meant at first. He was just someone I met at a cafe, another American trying to figure out life in Paris. And then we started spending more time together. And I realized that I was feeling things I hadn't felt in a long time. What kind of things? Excitement. Possibility. The sense that I was discovering new parts of myself instead of just going through familiar motions." Emma looked at me directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Alex. I've loved you for 3 years. But I think we both knew our relationship had become more about comfort than passion." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow, but I couldn't argue with them. Our relationship had become comfortable, predictable, safe. We'd fallen into routines that felt more like habit than choice. And I'd been content with that, because comfort felt like success after the chaos of my 20s. "I thought comfort was good," I said. "I thought we were building something stable and lasting." "We were. But stable and lasting doesn't mean much if it's not also fulfilling and growth-oriented." Emma set down her tea and turned to face me. "Fully, when did we stop challenging each other? When did we stop having conversations about our dreams instead of just our daily schedules? I wanted to defend our relationship, to point out all the ways we'd supported each other and built a life together. But sitting in that Parisian apartment, surrounded by Emma's new artwork and the evidence of her transformed perspective, I could see what she meant. We'd become expert at managing a shared life, but terrible at inspiring each other to grow. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Do you want to stay in Paris permanently? Build a life with David?" "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "The residency ends in 2 months. David has been talking about traveling together, maybe spending time in other European cities, but I haven't made any permanent decisions. What about us? What about our apartment in San Francisco, our friends, the life we built together?" Emma was quiet for a long time, and I could see her struggling with the complexity of emotions. She was processing. "I can't go back to the way things were, Alex. Even if I came home tomorrow, even if David disappeared from the picture completely, I can't pretend that I haven't learned things about myself here that I need to honor. Kind of things that I'm braver than I thought, that I can adapt to new situations and thrive in uncertainty, that I don't need someone to take care of me as much as I need someone who encourages me to take care of myself." Emma paused, searching for the right words. "You were always so good at protecting me from discomfort, at making my life easier. But I think I needed some discomfort to remember who I was outside of our relationship." The irony wasn't lost on me that Emma was crediting her growth to experiences she'd had while living in an apartment I'd provided for her. Even her independence had been facilitated by my resources, though she didn't know it yet. "There's something else you need to know," I said, realizing that full honesty required more disclosure than I'd already provided. "I bought this apartment 2 years ago, long before you decided to come to Paris. It wasn't some elaborate scheme to control your experience here. It was just an investment property that happened to become the place you chose to restart your life." Emma stared at me for several moments, processing this additional layer of coincidence. "You're telling me that of all the apartments in all of Paris, I randomly chose to rent the one that belonged to my boyfriend?" "Ex-boyfriend," I corrected, gently. "And yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Or maybe it's not a coincidence at all," Emma said slowly. "Maybe some part of me was always looking for a connection to you, even when I was trying to create distance. Possibility hadn't occurred to me, but I could see the logic in it." Emma had always been drawn to spaces that felt warm and carefully curated, and I'd put considerable effort into making the Parisian apartment feel like a home rather than just a rental property. Perhaps she'd been unconsciously attracted to the same aesthetic sensibilities that had guided my design choices. "Does it change anything?" I asked, "knowing that I own this place?" "It makes everything more complicated," Emma admitted. "Been so angry at you for the past hour, feeling like you'd violated my privacy and manipulated the situation. But if it really was just a coincidence, it was, at least initially. What happened after you moved in, the monitoring, and the decision to come here, that was me making active choices about how to handle an impossible situation." Emma nodded slowly, and I could see her trying to sort through the tangled ethics of what had unfolded between us. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, are you here to fight for our relationship, or are you here to get closure so you can move on?" The question forced me to examine motivations I hadn't fully acknowledged, even to myself. I'd told myself that I was coming to Paris to understand what had gone wrong between us, to see if there was any possibility of repair. But sitting in that apartment, seeing how Emma had transformed during her time away from me, I realized that what I really wanted was permission to let go. "Both, maybe?" I said finally. "I needed to see this for myself to understand what you'd found here that you couldn't find with me. I think I needed to hear you say that our relationship had run its course, that it wasn't just about Paris or David, but about us outgrowing what we'd built together. And now that you've heard it," I looked around the apartment one more time, taking in the afternoon light that Emma had described so poetically in her phone calls, the paintings that showed her artistic evolution, the evidence of a life that was fuller and more vibrant than anything we'd shared in San Francisco. "Now I think I understand why you had to leave," I said, "why you can't come back, at least not to what we were before." Emma reached across the space between us and took my hand, the first physical contact we'd had since I'd arrived. "I'm sorry I didn't handle this better from the beginning. Should have been more honest about what I was feeling, more direct about what I needed to explore. I should have been more willing to listen when you tried to tell me you weren't happy. I should have been brave enough to have the hard conversations instead of deflecting every time you've brought up making changes. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, holding hands like the friends we'd probably always been underneath the romantic relationship we'd tried to force into permanence. Outside the window, Paris continued its eternal dance of beauty and motion, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in apartments throughout the city. "What happens with the lease?" Emma asked eventually. "Do you want me to move out?" I'd been dreading this practical question because it forced me to make decisions that would affect Emma's life in ways she couldn't fully understand. If I terminated her lease, she'd lose not just the apartment, but potentially her ability to stay in Paris for the remainder of her residency. If I let her continue living there, I'd be subsidizing the life she was building with someone else. "Stay," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Finish your residency. Figure out what comes next. The apartment is beautiful, and you're using it exactly as it was meant to be used." "Alex, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything," I interrupted. "You're paying rent through the management company just like any other tenant? The fact that I happen to be the owner doesn't change the business relationship we have now." Emma squeezed my hand, and I could see relief and gratitude warring with guilt in her expression. "Thank you for understanding, for being generous, even when you didn't have to be. Thank you for being honest, finally. Nice. Even though it hurt." We talked for another hour, covering practical details about our shared possessions in San Francisco, mutual friends who would need to be told about our breakup, and the strange new dynamic we'd have to navigate as ex-partners who were now also landlord and tenant. It was surreal but somehow fitting that our relationship would end in such an unconventional way. When David returned from the cafe, he found us laughing over a shared memory from our early days together. The tension from earlier replaced by something that felt more like friendly closure. He seemed relieved that we'd managed to have a civil conversation, and I found myself appreciating his tactful handling of what could have been a much more dramatic situation. "I should go," I said, standing up and looking around the apartment one last time. "My flight back to San Francisco is tomorrow morning? Already?" Emma seemed surprised by how quickly I was leaving. "I got the answers I came for," I said simply. "There's no reason to extend this any longer than necessary." Emma walked me to the door, and we stood there awkwardly for a moment, both of us uncertain about how to end this chapter of our lives. Finally, she hugged me, a brief but genuine embrace that felt like both goodbye and forgiveness. "Be happy," I told her. "Paint beautiful things. Fall in love with David or don't, but make sure you're making choices because they excite you, not because they're safe. Take care of yourself," she replied. "And Alex, maybe next time you fall in love with someone, try to grow with them, instead of just growing comfortable." I nodded, knowing she was right and that I'd carry that advice into whatever relationships came next. As I walked down the stairs and out onto the cobblestone streets of Montmartre, I felt lighter than I had in months. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating. Emma was going to stay in Paris, at least for now. She was going to continue living in my apartment while building a life with someone else. And somehow, that felt exactly right. 3 months after my Paris revelation, I was back in my San Francisco office when Marcus knocked on my door with an expression. I'd learned to associate with either very good news or very bad problems. Given that our company had been thriving since my return from Europe, I was optimistic about which category this fell into. "We have a situation with the Paris property," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a manila folder. That looked suspiciously thick. My stomach immediately tightened. What kind of situation? The tenant wants to buy it. I stared at Marcus for several seconds, certain I'd misheard him. Emma wants to buy the apartment through the management company, just like any other potential buyer. She submitted a formal offer yesterday, actually above market value. Apparently, she's been saving money from selling her artwork, and David has some family money he's willing to invest. Marcus opened the folder and spread out the paperwork. "Legally, we have no obligation to sell to her, but financially, it's a solid offer." The irony of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Emma had unknowingly fallen so in love with my apartment that she wanted to make it permanently hers, using money earned from the artistic breakthrough she'd experienced while living there. The universe's sense of humor was apparently inexhaustible. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure why the number mattered. Marcus told me the figure, and I had to admit it was generous. Emma was offering enough to give me a substantial profit on my original investment, plus the rental income I'd been collecting for the past several months. From a purely business perspective, it was an ideal outcome. What did you tell the management company? That we'd consider it and respond within the standard time frame. I wanted to talk to you first because, well, this isn't exactly a standard tenant situation. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the emotional and practical implications of what Emma was proposing. Selling her the apartment would sever the last business connection between us, eliminating any reason for our paths to cross again. It would also mean that she was planning to stay in Paris permanently, making David and her new life there more than just an extended adventure. But there was something else, something that made the decision more complex than simple real estate. Emma was offering to buy the space where she'd rediscovered herself as an artist and a person. She was willing to invest her own money in the place that had transformed her life. Not knowing that the transformation had been facilitated by someone who'd loved her. I need to think about it, I told Marcus, though I was already fairly certain what my answer would be. That evening I called my friend Lisa to talk through the situation. She'd been following my post-Paris adjustment with a mixture of support and gentle criticism that good friends provide during major life transitions. She wants to buy it? Lisa repeated after I'd explained the offer. That's actually kind of beautiful. How is it beautiful? It's weird and complicated and probably the most expensive real estate transaction in history to be motivated by. Unresolved romantic feelings? It's beautiful because she doesn't know, Lisa said patiently. She's not trying to maintain a connection to you or make some grand gesture. She genuinely loves that place and wants to make it her home. She's making a choice based on what that space means to her life now, not what it meant to your relationship. That's exactly the kind of independent decision-making you said you wanted her to develop. Lisa had a point, though I wasn't ready to admit it. But if I sell it to her, I'm essentially funding her new life with David. That feels like you're being a decent human being who wants his ex-girlfriend to be happy. Like I'm being taken advantage of by someone who doesn't even know she's taking advantage of me. Lisa was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. Alex, can I ask you something? What would you want to happen? In an ideal world, if you could write the ending to this story, what would it look like? The question caught me off guard because I realized I'd been so focused on the mechanics of the situation that I hadn't considered what outcome would actually make me feel good about everything that had happened. I guess I'd want Emma to be happy and successful, living a life that fulfills her in ways our relationship couldn't. And I'd want to feel like I played a positive role in that, even if she never knows it. Then sell her the apartment. It's not that simple. It really is that simple. You bought an investment property that happened to become the place where someone you cared about found herself again. Now she wants to make it permanently hers, and you have the power to make that happen. The fact that she doesn't know you're involved just makes it a cleaner transaction. After hanging up with Lisa, I spent the evening walking through San Francisco, trying to clear my head and think through the decision rationally. The city felt different to me now, smaller somehow, after experiencing Paris and understanding what Emma had been seeking when she left. I could see why she'd felt constrained here, why she'd needed something more expansive and inspiring than what we'd built together. By the time I got home, I'd made my decision. I called Marcus and told him to accept Emma's offer. Are you sure? He asked. Once we sign the papers, there's no going back. She'll own the apartment, and you'll have no reason to know what happens in her life anymore, I'm sure. It's the right thing to do. The sale process took 6 weeks to complete, involving French lawyers, international banking, and more paperwork than seemed reasonable for a single apartment transaction. Throughout it all, I found myself imagining Emma's excitement as she navigated the bureaucracy of becoming a property owner in Paris. I wondered if she'd paint the walls different colors, if she'd change the furniture I'd chosen, if she'd hang her own artwork in the spaces I'd left, deliberately neutral. The day the sale was finalized, I received a notification from the management company confirming the transfer of ownership.
Emma.
Rodriguez was now the official owner of the apartment where she'd rebuilt her life, and I was officially out of the real estate business in Paris. The chapter was closed in the most complete way possible. I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd feel a sense of closure and move on with my life in San Francisco. But 3 days later, I received a package at my office that changed everything. The return address was from Paris, handwritten, in Emma's familiar script. Inside the package was a small canvas, maybe 8 inches by 10 inches, showing the view from the apartment balcony at sunset. The painting captured the golden light hitting the Saker. See, you're in a way that made the entire scene look magical, dreamlike. It was the kind of artwork that would make someone fall in love with Paris just by looking at it. There was also a note written on thick paper that smelled faintly of the lavender hand cream Emma had always used. Alex, the note began, I don't know if you'll understand why I'm sending this, but I needed you to see what I see when I look out my window every evening. This apartment has changed my life in ways I'm still discovering, and I wanted to share a piece of that transformation with someone who would understand what it means to find the place where you belong. I know our relationship ended painfully, and I know I hurt you by not being more honest about what I was feeling. But I also know that you played a role in me finding myself again, even if you don't realize it. The support you gave me during our time together, it's the way you encouraged my art even when I was struggling, the confidence you helped me build in myself, all of that made it possible for me to be brave enough to come to Paris and stay here. I wanted you to know that I'm happy. David and I are engaged, and we're planning to stay in Paris permanently. I've been accepted into a graduate program at the École des Beaux-Arts, and my work is being exhibited in a small gallery in the Marais. None of this would have been possible without the foundation you helped me build, and I'm grateful for that. Even though we couldn't make our romantic relationship work, I hope you're finding your own version of happiness in San Francisco. You deserve someone who can grow with you instead of growing away from you. With love and gratitude, Emma Tsai bought the apartment. I know that probably seems impulsive, but it feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. Sometimes the right decision is the one that makes no logical sense but feels completely true in your heart. I read the note 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of meaning I hadn't caught initially. Emma was thanking me for supporting her growth, while having no idea that I'd literally provided the space where that growth had occurred. She was sharing her happiness with me while being completely unaware that I'd facilitated the circumstances that made it possible. The painting now sits on my bookshelf at home, a daily reminder of the strange and beautiful ways that love can continue to exist, even after relationships end. Every time I look at it, I see Emma's artistic evolution, her joy in her new life, and the sunset view from the balcony of the apartment I bought as an investment and she transformed into a home. 6 months after receiving Emma's package, I was having dinner with a woman named Sophia, an architect I'd met through work who shared my interest in international real estate development. We were discussing her recent project designing affordable housing in Barcelona when she mentioned her dream of spending a year in Paris, studying French architectural techniques and immersing herself in European design culture. You should do it, I said, meaning it completely. Life's too short to postpone the experiences that excite you. Easy for you to say, Sophia laughed. You don't have to figure out where to live or how to navigate French bureaucracy or whether you'll be able to maintain your career momentum from another country. I smiled, thinking about Emma's journey and how different things might have been if I'd encouraged her dreams instead of unconsciously discouraging them by making our shared life too comfortable to leave. Actually, I said, I might be able to help with some of those logistics. I know Paris pretty well, and I have connections with property management companies there. As Sophia's face lit up with excitement, I realized that I'd learned something valuable from the experience with Emma. Instead of trying to keep people comfortable and close, I could use my resources to help them pursue the adventures that would make them grow. Instead of being threatened by other people's dreams, I could be someone who made those dreams more achievable. 3 months later, I was on a plane to Paris. I didn't spy on an ex-girlfriend or confront the end of a relationship, but to help Sophia. find an apartment for her year abroad. We spent a weekend exploring different neighborhoods, meeting with rental agents, and discovering the city through the eyes of someone experiencing it for the first time. On our last evening there, Sophia insisted we have dinner in Montmartre, claiming she'd heard it was the most romantic district in the city. As we walked through the narrow streets after our meal, I found myself on Rue des Martyrs, standing in front of the building that contained Emma's apartment. "What a beautiful building," Sophia said, admiring the classic Parisian architecture. "I wonder what it's like to live somewhere with so much character and history." I looked up at the third floor balcony where I knew Emma probably had her easel set up, catching the last light of the day for her evening painting session. The windows glowed warmly, and I could imagine the life happening inside, Emma and David preparing dinner, discussing their wedding plans, planning their future in the city they'd both fallen in love with. "I think," I said, taking Sophia's hand, and turning away from the building, "it's exactly as magical as it looks." As we walked back toward the main boulevards, I felt a sense of peace that had taken me almost a year to achieve. Emma had been right when she'd said that some people need discomfort to remember who they are. I'd needed the discomfort of losing her to remember that love isn't about holding on to people, but about helping them become the fullest versions of themselves, even when that means letting them go. The apartment on Rue des Martyrs would always be connected to my story with Emma, but it was her home now, the place where she'd chosen to build her future. And I was finally ready to build my own future elsewhere with someone who wanted to grow alongside me rather than away from me. Sometimes the best investment you can make is in someone else's happiness, especially when they never have to know you made it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is disappear from someone's story so completely that they can write their own ending without worrying about your feelings or expectations. Emma had wanted to find herself in Paris, and I'd wanted to understand what I'd lost when she left, and I had. We'd both gotten what we needed, just not in the way either of us had expected when this strange journey began. The last text I ever sent to Emma's number was simple: "Congratulations on your engagement. Be happy." She never responded, and I never expected her to. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations. Others end with quiet acknowledgement that some chapters have to close completely before new ones can begin. 6 months later, Sophia and I moved in together in a San Francisco apartment with big windows and enough space for both of our dreams. We talk about traveling together, about the cities we want to explore, and the experiences we want to share. We challenge each other to take risks and pursue opportunities that might be uncomfortable, but ultimately growth-promoting. I still own rental properties in various European cities, but now I think of them differently. They're not just investments or vacation homes. They're spaces where people can discover new versions of themselves, where strangers can become artists, where comfort zones can be safely abandoned in favor of something more expansive and alive. Every month, I receive a small rental payment from a property management company in Barcelona, where Sophia is spending her sabbatical year studying Gaudi's architectural techniques. The apartment she's renting happens to be one I purchased too, years ago, but she doesn't know that, and she never will. She just knows that she found the perfect space to support her creative growth, and that's all she needs to know. Some patterns are worth repeating, especially when they help people become who they're meant to be. Standing in that Parisian apartment, while Emma processed the revelation that I owned the place she'd been calling home, felt like watching someone's entire worldview crumble and reconstruct itself in real time. The silence stretched between us as she moved from the sofa to the window, her fingers tracing patterns on the glass, while her mind worked through the implications of what this meant for everything she thought she knew about her independence. "The lease I signed," she said finally, her voice hollow. "The security deposit, the monthly payments, all of it went to you?" "Through the property management company, yes. But Emma, you have to understand that I never intended for this to happen. I bought this apartment 2 years ago as part of a portfolio expansion. When you found it through that rental app, I was as shocked as you are now." Emma turned from the window to face me, and I could see something shifting in her expression. The initial shock was giving way to something harder, more analytical, but you didn't tell me. "For weeks you let me pay rent to you while I thought I was finally financially independent, finally making my own way in the world. You are making your own way. You're paying market rate for a beautiful apartment, creating incredible art, building relationships with people who inspire you. The fact that I happen to own the building doesn't diminish any of that. It doesn't. It, though? Emma's voice was rising now. I could see anger replacing the vulnerability that had characterized our earlier conversation. I've been so proud of myself for finding this place, for negotiating the lease in my broken French, for proving that I could handle living abroad on my own. And it turns out that even when I was trying to escape our relationship, I was still somehow dependent on you. The accusation hit harder than I'd expected, because there was truth in it that I hadn't fully acknowledged. Even though I hadn't orchestrated Emma's choice of apartment, I had benefited from it in ways that went beyond simple rental income. I'd been able to maintain a connection to her life, to feel useful and needed even after she'd made it clear that she didn't want me in her daily experience. That's not fair, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it wasn't. You found this place on your own, signed the lease on your own, created a life here on your own. Life. I've been a passive participant. In all of this, passive, Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. Alex, you've been watching me through security cameras for weeks. You knew about David before I even told you he existed. You've been monitoring my life like some kind of surveillance operation disguised as property management. The cameras to invade your privacy. They're standard security equipment, and you were informed about them in your lease agreement. Don't hide behind technicalities, Emma snapped. You know the difference between having security cameras for legitimate purposes and using them to spy on your ex-girlfriend's new relationship? She was right, and we both knew it. I could justify my actions using legal language and business protocols, but the emotional reality was that I'd been unable to let go of Emma completely. And the cameras had provided me with a way to maintain proximity to her life without her consent or knowledge. You're right, I said, the admission feeling like a physical weight leaving my chest. I crossed lines that I shouldn't have crossed. I told myself I was just being a responsible property owner, but that was bullshit. I was hurt and confused, and I used the cameras because I couldn't accept that you'd moved on so easily. Wasn't easy, Emma said, her anger softening slightly. None of this has been easy. Leaving you, starting over in a foreign country, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not half of a couple. But it was necessary, and I needed to do it without feeling like I was being watched and judged. I wasn't judging you, weren't you? When you saw me with David, when you watched us have dinner together, when you observed all the ways my life here is different from the life we shared, you're telling me you didn't have opinions about my choices? I wanted to deny it, but Emma deserved honesty even when it was uncomfortable. I had opinions. I was jealous and hurt and probably judgmental about how quickly you seemed to connect with someone new. But I also saw how happy you looked, how inspired you seemed, how much more like yourself you appeared to be, when which one mattered more to you, your hurt feelings or my happiness. The question forced me to confront motivations I'd been avoiding examining too closely. If I'd truly prioritized Emma's happiness, I would have respected her need for space and distance. I wouldn't have used my accidental position as her landlord to maintain surveillance over her new life. Honestly, my hurt feelings, at least initially, I was so focused on what I was losing that I couldn't appreciate what you were gaining. Emma nodded slowly, and I could see her processing not just my admission but what it revealed about the patterns that had existed in our relationship even before Paris. That's what I was afraid of, even when we were together. Sometimes I felt like you were more invested in keeping me comfortable and close than in supporting me to grow and explore. I thought keeping you comfortable was how I showed love, and I thought accepting that comfort was how I showed appreciation. But somewhere along the way, we both forgot that love is supposed to challenge you to become better, not just make you feel safe staying the same. The conversation was moving into territory that felt more like therapy than confrontation, and I realized that we were finally having the honest discussion about our relationship that we'd been avoiding for months before Emma left for Paris. So what happens now? I asked. With the apartment with us? With everything? Emma was quiet for several minutes, looking around the space that had become her sanctuary. I want to stay here, she said finally. Not because it's your apartment, but because it's become my home. I've painted my best work in this light. I've learned to navigate this neighborhood, built relationships with the shopkeepers and the woman who runs the cafe downstairs. This place represents everything I discovered about myself when I was brave enough to start over. You can stay as long as you want. The lease is legitimate, and you're an ideal tenant. That's not what I mean. Emma turned to face me directly. I want to buy it. I've been saving money from selling my paintings, and David has offered to help with the down payment. One want to own this place to make it permanently mine instead of just renting someone else's vision of what a home should be. The proposal caught me completely off guard. Emma wanted to buy the apartment where she'd rebuilt her life, using money she'd earned from the artistic breakthrough that had happened, while living in space I'd provided. The irony was so perfect, it felt like fiction. Are you sure? Buying property in France as a foreigner is complicated, and you've only been here a few months. I've never been more sure of anything. This apartment isn't just where I live, Alex. It's where I remembered who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs me to be. It's where I learned that I'm braver and more resourceful than I thought. It's where I fell in love again, both with David and with myself. Hearing Emma talk about the apartment in those terms made me realize something I hadn't fully acknowledged before. She wasn't just asking to buy a piece of real estate. She was asking to purchase the physical space where her transformation had occurred. To own the place that had facilitated her growth from dependent girlfriend to independent artist. If I sell it to you, that would make this even more complicated than it already is. Or it would make it simpler. Right now, every month when I pay rent, I'm unknowingly sending money to my ex-boyfriend. If I buy the apartment, that financial connection disappears. We could actually have a clean break. Emma had a point, though I wasn't sure she understood all the implications of what she was proposing. If I sold her the apartment, I'd be using the profit from her rent payments to fund the sale that would allow her to stay in Paris permanently. With David, it would be the ultimate act of funding someone else's happiness at the expense of my own romantic interests. Have you talked to David about this? We've discussed it. He loves the place as much as I do, and he thinks it makes sense for us to invest in property here if we're planning to stay long-term. You're planning to stay long-term? Emma smiled. And it was the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her since I'd arrived at the apartment. David proposed last week. We're engaged. The news hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd been expecting something like it based on what I'd observed through the security cameras, hearing Emma say the words out loud made the reality of her new life undeniable. Congratulations, I managed to say, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. He seems like a good guy. He is. He's kind and creative, and he makes me want to be the best version of myself, instead of the most comfortable version. We bring out each other's ambitions instead of each other's fears. The implicit comparison to our relationship was clear, and it stung because it was accurate. Emma and I had brought out each other's desire for security and stability, but we'd rarely challenged each other to grow or take risks. I'm happy for you, I said, and realized that despite the pain of the moment, I was. You deserve someone who inspires you. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. We spent the next hour discussing the practical details of a potential sale. Emma had done her research and knew the market value of similar properties. In the neighborhood, her offer was fair, perhaps even generous, and the transaction would give me a substantial return on my original investment. More importantly, it would give Emma the ownership and autonomy she'd been seeking when she left San Francisco. She'd be able to renovate the space to suit her and David's needs, to paint the walls colors that reflected her personality, to make changes that would transform my investment property into their permanent home. I need some time to think about it, I told her as our conversation wound down. This isn't just a business decision for me. I understand. Take all the time you need. But Alex, I want you to know that whether you decide to sell to me or not, I'm grateful for everything that brought me to this place. Our relationship might not have worked out, but it taught me things about myself that I needed to learn before I could be ready for what David and I have now. As I prepared to leave the apartment, Emma walked me to the door. We stood in the entryway awkwardly, both of us uncertain about how to end this surreal encounter. For what it's worth, I said finally, I think you made the right choice coming here. You're different in a way that suits you. Thank you, and Alex. I hope you find someone who makes you want to grow instead of just stay comfortable. You deserve that too. I kissed Emma's cheek gently, a gesture that felt more like blessing than goodbye, and walked out of the apartment that had become the center of both of our transformations. As I descended the stairs and emerged onto the cobblestone streets of Montmartre, I realized that I'd gotten the closure I'd come to Paris seeking, just not in the way I'd expected. Emma was going to stay in Paris, marry David, and build a life that had nothing to do with me. And for the first time since she'd left San Francisco, that felt exactly right. The question now was whether I was generous enough to sell her the apartment that would make that new life possible, knowing that I'd be funding my own complete removal from her story. As I walked through the narrow streets toward my hotel, I realized that the answer to that question would determine not just Emma's future, but what kind of person I wanted to be as I built my own future without her. 2 weeks after returning from Paris, I sat in Marcus's office staring at the purchase agreement Emma had submitted through the French property management company. Her signature looked exactly the same as it had on birthday cards and grocery lists during our 3 years together. But everything else about the document represented a complete departure from the life we'd shared. She's offering 15%. Above market value, Marcus said, reviewing the financial details with the detachment of someone who hadn't spent years loving the person making the offer. Given the current exchange rates and the appreciation the property has shown since we bought it, this would be our most profitable European sale to date. I nodded absently, my attention caught by a detail I hadn't noticed during my initial review of the paperwork. Emma had listed her profession as visual artist rather than the graphic designer she'd been when we were together. Even in legal documents, she was embracing the identity transformation that Paris had made possible. There's something else, Marcus continued, pulling out a second folder. The management company included a personal letter with the offer. Apparently the tenant wanted to explain why purchasing this particular property was important to her. My stomach tightened as Marcus handed me an envelope with my name written in Emma's familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her neat script, the kind of thoughtful communication she'd always excelled at when she had time to organize her thoughts. Alex, the letter began. I know this purchase request must seem strange coming so soon after our conversation in Paris, but I wanted you to understand why this apartment means so much to me that I'm willing to invest everything I've saved to make it permanently mine. This place isn't just where I live. It's where I discovered I could trust my own instincts about what would make me happy. When I walked through the door for the first time, something clicked into place that I hadn't even realized was missing. The light, the view, the way the rooms flow together, even the creaky floorboard by the kitchen window, everything felt like home in a way nowhere else ever has. I've painted 17 canvases since moving here, more than I created in the entire year before leaving San Francisco. 3 of them have already sold to a gallery in the Marais, and I have my first solo exhibition scheduled for next spring. David says I'm different here, more confident and decisive, more willing to take creative risks. I think he's right. I understand if selling to me feels too complicated given our history. I understand if you'd prefer to maintain this as an investment property or sell to someone without our emotional baggage. But I wanted you to know that if you're willing to, let me buy this place. You'd be giving me the gift of true independence. No more rent payments that connect us financially. No more worrying about lease renewals or the possibility that you might decide to sell to someone else. This apartment has become the foundation for everything I'm building with David, but more than that, it's become the foundation for everything I'm building with myself. I hope you'll consider my offer, not as your ex-girlfriend asking for a favor, but as someone who found exactly where she belongs and wants to make it official. Whatever you decide. Thank you for being part of the journey that brought me here. With gratitude, Emma. I read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of meaning about what Emma was really asking for. She wasn't just requesting to buy real estate. She was asking for my blessing on her new life, my permission to sever the last financial tie between us, my acknowledgement that she'd found something worth investing in completely. What are you thinking? Marcus asked, after I'd finished reading. I'm thinking that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is disappear from someone's story so completely that they forget you were ever part of it. Is that what you want? to disappear from her story? I considered the question seriously, examining the mixture of love and loss and genuine happiness for Emma. That had been swirling in my chest since my return from Paris. I want her to own her transformation completely. I want her to look around that apartment and see only her accomplishments, her courage, her decision to bet on herself. I don't want her to ever have to think about the fact that I provided the space where it happened. Marcus nodded slowly. So you're going to approve the sale? I'm going to approve the sale. But I want to do it in a way that makes it clear this is a business transaction, not a romantic gesture. Emma needs to know that she earned this, that she's paying fair market value for something she deserves to own. The legal process took 6 weeks to complete, involving international lawyers, currency exchanges, and more paperwork than seemed reasonable for transferring ownership of a single apartment. Throughout it all, I found myself imagining Emma's excitement as she navigated French bureaucracy, probably improving her language skills and building confidence with each successfully completed form. When the sale was finally finalized, I received a notification from my bank confirming the transfer of funds. Emma Rodriguez was now the official owner of the apartment where she'd rebuilt her life, and I was officially out of the Paris real estate business. That same day, I called a florist in Montmartre and arranged for a small bouquet to be delivered to Emma's new address with a simple card. Congratulations on your new home. You earned this, eh? I never heard whether she received the flowers or understood who had sent them. I preferred it that way. Some gestures are meant to remain anonymous, small kindnesses that exist for their own sake, rather than for the gratitude they might generate. 3 months later, I was having coffee with a woman named Claire, an urban planner I'd met through a professional conference who shared my interest in sustainable development projects. She was telling me about her dream of spending a year in Barcelona, studying how European cities integrated green spaces into historic architecture. When I realized I was hearing echoes of Emma's per Paris, conversations about artistic residencies and international opportunities, you should absolutely do it, I told Claire. Life's too short to postpone the experiences that really excite you. Easy to say when you're not the one figuring out housing and work permits and whether you can afford to take a year away from steady income, Claire laughed. Actually, I might be able to help with some of those logistics. I know Barcelona pretty well, and I have connections with property management companies there. As Claire's face lit up with possibility, I realized something had shifted in how I thought about using my resources to support other people's dreams. Instead of seeing someone else's growth as a threat to our relationship, I could be someone who made their aspirations more achievable. 6 months later, I received a wedding announcement in the mail. Emma and David had married in a small ceremony at the Saker, with a reception in the courtyard of the apartment building they now own together. The photo showed Emma in a simple white dress, radiant with happiness. Standing on the balcony, where I'd first watched her paint through security cameras, I studied the image for several minutes, looking for traces of the woman I'd known during our 3 years together. She was there in Emma's smile and the way she held her head, but everything else spoke to the person she'd become in Paris. Confident, artistic, completely at ease with herself and her choices. I framed the announcement and put it on my bookshelf, next to a photo Claire had sent from Barcelona, where she was spending her sabbatical year studying Gaudi's integration of natural forms into urban architecture. Claire was renting a beautiful apartment near the Sagrada Familia, a space she'd found through contacts I'd provided, though she didn't know I owned the building where she was staying. Some patterns are worth repeating, especially when they help people become who they're meant to be. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations, but the best ones end with quiet recognition that love sometimes means stepping back far enough to let someone write their own happy ending. Emma had wanted to find herself in Paris, and she had. I'd wanted to understand what I'd lost when she left, and I had. We'd both gotten what we needed, just not in the way either of us had expected when this strange journey began. The last text I ever sent to Emma's number was simple. Saw the wedding announcement. Be happy always. She never responded, and I never expected her to. Some chapters have to close completely before new ones can begin. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.